But you know, we don't have 22 or 25 different versions of reality in which we live. We don't even have 4. We have one version of reality. That version of reality we perceive as nested systems, and the biophysical perspective is that in the biosphere, everything is contained within that. We have these nested systems. Now, these nested systems happen to be, like Gail was talking about this morning, emergent systems. They're self-organizing emergent systems, sometimes called complex adaptive systems. So my going-in assumption is that the same fundamental stochastic processes that shape our physical, chemical, and biological emergent systems also shape our social and economic emergent systems. Now, in my mind, I've been trying to figure out what these fundamental stochastic processes might be, and I can organize them into a block diagram like this that sort of tells the story for me. At the bottom we have, sorry?
What does emergent mean?
Emergent means you did not build it into the design. It organizes itself and comes out. The result is more than what you put into it. So at the bottom we have this fluctuation of recurring things, those things that happen relentlessly, one after another, over and over again, day after day after day, year after year after year, always repeating, but never exactly the same. It is in this background of relentless fluctuation that the components of complex systems appear accidentally, randomly, but most of the time they're not at all persistent. Then in that background of fluctuation, we have some things that even though everything else is changing relentlessly, they don't change. The total energy in a system is one of those things as an example. So these conservation effects provide a statistical platform on which more complex systems are able to organize themselves and emerge. So when these random accidental bits of complexity appear, some of them are selected for persistence. And the kinds of things that are involved in selecting them for persistence are like the maximum power principle, models of growth like EROI. And then we have, working against that at the same time, forces that cause complex systems to just fall apart. And there we've got thermodynamic entropy and stuff like that. Now I'm going to make what I know many of you are going to think is an outrageous claim. That's okay. I think economic agent-based models are the best type of economic model for studying issues of sustainability. Let me first describe what an agent-based model is. It's a computer-based economic model. When you construct it, you put independent agents inside the computer model interacting with one another. Now, the neat thing about an agent-based model is that it demonstrates a complex adaptive system. It demonstrates a self-organizing emergent system. It's not a simulation. It is a complex adaptive system. That's an important distinction. It's not a simulation. I'm not pretending that this is a self-organizing complex system. It actually is one. However, it's not predictive. You can't use an agent-based model to figure out what the cost of oil is going to be tomorrow, or what the weather is going to be tomorrow, or things like that. What it does do is it gives you an opportunity to induce understanding of the behavior of these kinds of systems. Now, when you're programming it, this is what makes it emergent. You program at the detailed level. You decide what are the basic rules for these agents when they interact with each other. Some of the rules might be biophysical, like where you get your food, how you reproduce, how and why you die. Some are economic, how you get into an economic transaction, buying and selling. Some are environmental, how you extract resources from the environment and how you dump your waste back into them. And once you've got a small set of rules, the best models have a really small set of rules, then the macroeconomic stuff just kind of flows out of it. Like bubbles rising to the top of a glass of beer, the macroeconomic statistics are at the top, employment statistics, GDP, prices, productivity, that kind of thing, if you've built the rules that are going to generate that kind of stuff. Very quickly, a capital exchange model is a particular kind of economic ABM, and this is where I think some of you in biophysical economics might have a little difficulty with this. It's the particular kind of agent-based model in which you just model the money, no mass, no energy, no goods, no services, no prices. It's, I know some of you are not going to like that. It's only the money, right? So you can have an agent-based model that is just about an ecosystem. You've got bugs in a pond and they don't use money. You can also have an agent-based model which is just in an economy where you look at the money and you don't worry about the energy. Some examples of this kind of model: Dr. Viktor Yakovenko's BDY model. Some of you may be familiar with that. He's shown them here and in various other places. And then my conservation of money laboratory that I'm going to show you briefly. It's basically Dr. Yakovenko's model with a little difference. In his model, he put a certain amount of money in at the beginning, and then the amount of money did not change. One of his models that he did not publish the details of, he had bankers in there. But most of the ones that he described in his publication did not have bankers. I wanted to understand how money behaves when a bank is involved, so I added bankers to his model, and that's what I have. Now, back to my outrageous claim. In 2005, a couple of researchers in Europe, at the time when interest in sustainable development was reaching a feverish pitch, these two researchers were concerned that with the great variety of economic models available, the advice coming to the policymakers, to the lawmakers, was often conflicted and not very appropriate to the issues peculiar to the question of sustainability. So they decided they were going to do a survey of all economic models available, and they were going to rank them according to criteria that were important to questions of sustainability. And they published their results in this paper. Now, this was done about 13 years ago. I really wish one would be redone again. It's beyond my ability to do it, but I think it's a great study. They published their results in 3 tables within this paper. For time's sake, I'm just going to go through one of those tables. I think the most important one. So the goal of their study was to figure out the best models to issue to address issues of sustainability in policymaking. So the focus was advice for policymakers. These are 5 of the criteria that they used to evaluate the models. They lumped, I'm not sure how many, but it seems like there were about 30 models they looked at. They grouped them into 6 categories, and they evaluated one category against another. Agent-based models are within this category of what's called multi-agent models, and these are the scores that the agent-based models received. I'm going to compare those against the high scores of the other kinds of models. So for example, in interdisciplinary potential, if 2 experts from totally different disciplines collaborate on a model, are they both going to be happy? The system dynamics and multi-agents both received top scores. In long-term intergenerational? Do you deal with inequities within a single generation? Do you deal with inequities across generations? Again, system dynamics and multi-agents received top scores. When it came to uncertainty management, those kinds of models are specifically designed to deal with uncertainty, so it's no surprise that they came out with a top score. But
Bayesian, I'm sorry.
Bayesian networks, did I not say that?
I didn't hear it.
Okay. The Bayesian networks, they came out with a 0.39, agent-based models a little bit behind with a 0.30. For local global, is it the best advice for a village, for a province, for a country? Is it scalable in size? The agent-based models came out with a score of 0.34, double the score of the second place. And participation. Can you take it out of academia, show it to a man on the street who doesn't know economics, and involve him in the conversation so that you get some valuable feedback to improve the model? Agent-based models received a score of 0.40, twice the second place. Now, this is the most important of the three tables, but what really impressed me was that of the 19 criteria that these two researchers evaluated all of the models against, agent-based models came out as first place in 15 out of 19, and they came second place in the other 4. So at the time I read this, I had already been building agent-based models for about 20 years, and I was personally convinced that they were, well, first of all, really fun to make, but really instructive for me. So I was delighted to find this academic study that told me that I wasn't wrong in my opinions. But then you have to take it the next logical step, and I have to say this is where I've been coming from for the past 8 years. If ABMs can demonstrate the fundamental stochastic processes that shape our one reality, why not use them as laboratory tools with which we can study those processes to get a deeper insight into the nature of economic sustainability? Okay, so now I get to my main title. What is the global financial economy? I'm going to call it the GFE because to say global financial economy takes time and my tongue gets tangled, and so I prefer to call it the GFE. When we think about a national economy, for a number of years now, we tend to talk about two things. We tend to talk about the real economy, you see that at the bottom, and then the financial economy. So the real economy, it's got the biosphere at the bottom, the atmosphere, the pedosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, all at the bottom. Energy comes in and flows through it, but mass doesn't come in and flow out. Mass circulates down in there. And then you've got this icing at the top of the cake, the fiat money. When we go to the financial economy, the real economy, the diagram at the bottom tends to describe an economy of the early 1800s, but since about the mid-1800s, we've had some financial innovations like fractional reserve banking and things like that. And we've got a new kind of economy that has emerged. We're still talking about a national economy. We tend to refer to that as the financial economy, but there's a third kind that in the past 50 years has appeared, and that's what I'm calling the GFE. You see, it's a nice blue color, the same as the blue color at the top of the financial economy. There's the various financial economies that exist around the world, and the blue at the top of them kind of merges nicely into the GFE. You can't really tell the difference, but there is a difference. It's my view, obviously I'm negative about this, that the GFE is a parasitic system riding on top of the national financial economies. It emerged in the 1970s after a long period of gestation. It participates in those national economies, drawing positive credits from them and leaving negative debits behind. So that's why I think it's parasitic. Now, conservation laws, remember in my block diagram, conservation effects was the second box from the bottom. Conservation laws, I would argue, form stable platforms on which fundamental stochastic processes can then do their magic. It's those conservation laws that allow the accidental production of fluctuations of complexity to actually be selected and preserved and then form slowly into the more complex aspects of the biosphere that we're all aware of. So way back when Adam was a boy, there were just biophysical laws, the laws of thermodynamics, conservation of mass and energy. But then along came civilization. About 5,000 years ago, we all had minds and we had thoughts and we agreed on some things. And these would start as small ideas that would spread and become the foundation for a more complex society to grow. So like the rungs of a ladder, getting ever more complex, civilization has climbed, it's fallen, tripped and fallen a number of times, but it's climbed up this ladder until here we are today. So for example, real estate laws back there, the ancient empires of China, of the Middle East, of the Mediterranean, of Mesoamerica, they were all based on owning and controlling land. A little bit later in China, fiat money was invented, and that concept, kind of a strange idea, has spread around the world until now fiat money is the only kind of money we have, really. Then there are a couple, there's reserve banking, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and these EFT protocols and HFT protocols. Those are the final concepts that brought our modern GFE into existence. Now, at the bottom of that, I say these domains are stabilizing social means sufficiently well conserved. Well, what do I mean by sufficiently well conserved? I'm going to take a biological example, and I'm a Canadian. I'm going to take a Canadian example. Sufficiently well conserved so that it forms a stable platform for a complex society to build on top of that. So the biological example is DNA. Is DNA conserved? Well, no. Evolution has DNA changing all the time. Well, and certainly the amount of DNA is not conserved. It changes all the time. But we can do a calculation. The base rate, the number of base pairs in DNA transferred from one generation to the next. Now, a base pair is a unit from which the DNA molecule is built. So there are about 10 to the 9 base pairs in the human genome. But every time a new person is born, I didn't know the number was this big, about 80,000 of those base pairs are not properly copied. Now, I have every confidence that nature could arrange the reproduction of DNA to have perfect copies all the time. But when it comes to DNA in particular, you have to have reproduction with variation. So it's persistence requires that the copying of DNA not be perfect, that it have some error in it. So if you take the damage rate divided by the base rate and subtract it from 1, you can get something that I might call a conservation index for. Well, in Canada, every year banks release loans of about 10 to the 11th dollars, and now I don't know how you count something that you don't detect, but if you look up crime statistics, they say the number of dollars successfully counterfeited and slipped into the money supply in Canada each year, unnoticed, is about 60,000. Don't know where they get the number, but unnoticed counterfeiting, about 60,000. So you've got a damage rate, a base rate. We see that DNA is not well preserved because part of the evolution requires that it not be well preserved. But evolution of economic systems doesn't require that the variation come from preservation or poor preservation of money. So it's actually preserved to a fairly high level. But what's going on here? A whole bunch of people decided money is going to be treated with almost religious reverence, and therefore money will be conserved. Now, I'm going to get into that a little more. The GFE is a newly emergent ecosystem, not seen before in history. That's my argument. Now, if we look at the history of money, very quickly, started out with barter and debt. You might think of that as positive and negative money. Then it was replaced with commodity money. Then it was replaced with representative money. The Chinese invented fiat money about 1300, and that's pretty well the only kind of money we have at the moment is fiat money. And eventually, representative money was brought to an end. A long, bumpy divorce proceeding with the gold standard finally came to an end in the early 1970s. The gold standard was abandoned. Something really important happened then. This strong link between money and gold was weakened. Not totally severed, but it was weakened so that money was no longer tied to biophysical reality the way it had been before. But two other things happened at the same time. Yeah, and I was a programmer in the government when this happened, so I do recall this. Banks developed the Electronic Funds Transfer Protocols, EFT. That meant that they could move money from one bank account to another, or even from one bank to another, without moving any gold around, not even moving any paper around. They could just send a little biophysical signal along the wire. So there's still a tether to biophysical reality, but it's a very, very weak tether. And then in 1983, the NASDAQ decided to open itself for electronic trading, and now people could move stocks and bonds and ownership of things from one account to another without transmitting anything. You didn't have to move land to actually buy and sell land. Electronic trading was another weakening of that link. So with these kind of events 50 years ago, like a butterfly, modern money emerged from its long sleep in its cocoon and took flight. When that happened, it changed the world. I argue that modern money is just a little different from all money that existed prior to 1970. Now, it is conserved, and that has immense unintended consequences, and it's those unintended consequences that I wanted to explore when I built my model that is a variation of Dr. Yakovenko's model. So the dominant shape of money since the 1970s might be called C-shaped. That is, it's not made by the government, pushed down and pulled up again, U-shaped money. It's made by banks and merchants, loaned to peers in the economy, and then paid back to banks. Now, governments still have a role. They have a monopoly over creating the bills and coins, but those are just plastic bottles, right? It's not really money. A bank just, when it pulls a bill out of the drawer, it takes money out of your account, sticks it into the bill, you put it in your pocket. When you go to the bank, they put it in the drawer and they take the money out of that bill and they stick it in your account, right? So the bills and coins are fictitious and empty bottles, mason jars, that we use to carry money around with. So the structure of a modern national money supply might be considered to look like this. You've got the bills and coins that the government makes with its monopoly, but the real money supply is the bank loans, the positive money that the banks have and the negative money that they create. Now, when you go into a bank, how does a bank create money, or how does a merchant create money? It's the same in both cases, but let's say you go into a bank. You're a client of the bank, I'm a client of the bank, I have no money. And you're a banker, and you have no money. And I say, I'd like to borrow $1 million, please. And as a banker, you say, no problem. You fill out a loan agreement, you slide it up across the desk, and I sign it. I slide the $1 million loan agreement to you, and you put $1 million in my account. My net worth has not changed. Your net worth has not changed. You received $1 million and you paid $1 million. So the total money in the world has not changed. Now that's what I mean by conservation of money. Now, I could take that positive money and immediately pay off the loan and it's gone, right? But that's not what I do. I take that $1 million and I go out into the economy and I start spending it. And you as the banker, you say, well, I'm not going to sit here with this. I'm going to sell it on the debt market. So you sell the loan for some kind of a discount, and the negative money goes off in the market that way, and the positive money goes off in the market this way. And you expect that eventually that loan is going to be paid off, the money is going to trickle back, and it's gone, right? Well, mostly, right? There's always some that kind of wanders away over there and gets lost, and wanders away over there and gets lost. So, we have this axis of symmetry. So what we're conserving when we conserve money is the axis of symmetry. What kind of actions could break that symmetry? Well, the government could do things. It could print money, or it could tax money out of the population and then just destroy it. But economists and bankers don't like that. If you look up hyperinflation, you'll see that the Weimar Republic did that, and nobody says good things about them. And Venezuela seems to be in the same difficulty. I expect it has its similar roots. I can't create money, that's called counterfeiting, and I can't destroy money, that's called defacing the money of the realm. So we have these social beliefs, quasi-religious beliefs that you just don't mess with money in these ways. Now, if that was only in Canada, you'd say, well, that's kind of an oddity, right? But those ideas have spread around the world, so that the entire world has this quasi-religious reverence for the conservation of money, so it is conserved all around the world. Now, my background training is in physics and mathematics, so I thought I could maybe put together a mathematical equation that you could call the conservation of money law. It's going to be different because money is not energy. It behaves a little differently. Well, in physics, you have two kinds of conservation laws. One is called the continuity equation, and the other one is for the whole system. So a continuity equation looks at a single transaction. If one molecule has energy and another molecule has energy, and they bump together, the amount of energy before they bump together is the same as the amount afterwards. So that's a continuity law. It's the same thing with money. If I buy a stick of gum and I give you 50 cents, it's 50 cents when I hand it to you, and it's 50 cents when you receive it, right? So in a single transaction, money is conserved. At the higher level, you can look at the entire money supply. Now, because I'm not sure whether the Canadian money supply is symmetric or asymmetric, because you know, I'm an old retired guy sitting in my basement Googling stuff, and there's only so much you can learn in that way. So I couldn't really find out what the Bank of Canada does, but I came up with a rule for all the different possibilities. Now, I mentioned this this model that is based on Dr. Viktor Yakovenko's model. I haven't said this in front of him, but I'm sure he wouldn't disagree. His model is a stupidly simple model. It is incredible how simple it is. But what is also incredible is how closely it mimics the behavior of reality. Because in his model, I should have put a copy of his diagram here, but in his model, you just put an amount of positive money into the model, and then it's conserved, and then they participate in transferring that money around the way it would in any economy, and you end up with a small number of people who are very wealthy, and a very large number of people who are very poor. So in that model, you demonstrate the bane of our reality, the bane of our existence for the past 5,500 years at least, where in every society, you've got a few people that control it all. So I thought I would take his stupidly simple model and just make one small change. I would put bankers in there, and they would create money the way bankers do in reality. and people would have to pay interest on the loans. And the money would go out into the economy and spread around. So banks in this model, after I got working at it for a while, I figured out banks really have two roles. They have a public service role, which is to defend the religious sanctity of money. It will be conserved in this sense that the amount of symmetry in the system will be conserved. So I put a fractional reserve banking system in there so the money supply would breathe in and out. I made sure that every transaction had double entry bookkeeping so there are no arithmetic errors. Well, I didn't emulate counterfeiting, but that would be the role of banks to prevent counterfeiting. And then they have their own private role, which is to make a profit. So when I start my model up, I start with a slightly asymmetric money supply. I give the bankers no money, but I give all the people $3,000. So that they've got an initial endowment, an initial allotment given to them by the government. After 2,000 ticks, the bankers are still poor, but the size of the money supply has expanded. Some people are very wealthy, some people are poor. By 10,000 ticks, the bankers are getting more wealthy. By 30,000 ticks, the bankers are quite wealthy. And by 60,000 ticks, the bankers have it all. I'm thinking, so the positive money wanders off, and the negative money wanders off, and it didn't come together again, right? There was no, it's gone. Is that happening in the real world? Well, I kind of knew it was, so it was no big surprise, but I wanted to just make sure that my model is at least consistent with reality. This doesn't prove that the model is right, it just shows that it's consistent. And global financial assets, growing nicely, growing steadily. The total amount of money in the world exceeds the amount of property that you could actually hold, I think, at this point. I'm happy to say that as a retired high school teacher of Ontario, my Ontario teacher's pension plan is in there somewhere, so I own a piece of that. And unfortunately, I own a piece of that too. I own $50,000 of that for Canada's share of sovereign debt. So the positive money has gone to pension plans, corporate war chests, large pools of positive money that are used to control the world. And what's been left behind in the national coffers is the large pool of debt that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now, energy and money are linked. How much time do I have left? Energy and money are linked in the real economies, but they behave differently. And because they behave differently, that link is stretched, maybe even broken. I think stretched is really the proper word. So what is the money-energy linkage? Energy fluxes are the heart of the real economy. Money is a lien on energy consumption. I absolutely agree with that in the real economy. Energy is always positive. Energy is conserved. Energy degrades and dissipates. So I think from a biophysical economics point of view, most people would agree with that. In the GFE, it's similar but not the same. Modern money fluxes are the heart of the GFE. Energy costs change so slowly as to be effectively constant. So it's a small predictable cost of little consequence in the GFE. And I'll get to the reason why that is so. Modern money is created in positive and negative forms, so that's a little different from energy. Money is conserved, that's the same as energy, but it does not degrade or dissipate. It's kind of persistent. Once it separates, like I am not going to use my pension plan to pay off Canada's share of the sovereign debt. That's never going to happen. That positive money and that negative money is not going to come together and go, it is not going to happen. So money is peculiarly persistent once it has gotten into those distant pools. Now I want to talk about high frequency trading. This emerged in the 1930s, and has now become what I would consider to be almost something of plague proportions. How does it work? Well, all the investors in the world you could put on a continuum. You've got the buy and hold people like Warren Buffett over here. He looks at a firm, he looks at the corporate culture, he looks at the product mix, decides that's where I want to put my money, and he stands back for 8 years as a shareholder and lets the profits roll in. At the other end, you've got the high frequency traders. They don't want to hold anything for more than a day. They don't want to hold it overnight. So they watch the price of the stock for a period of time until they develop a kind of a profile. Now they use something, extreme value theory, the same kind of mathematics that you use to predict earthquakes or road waves or something like that. Once they've got a profile, they set a trigger. If it goes below that 25% line, the probability that it's going to go up is really high, so they're going to buy in at that point. Now, I'm going to skip over that slide. I was thinking, why don't people just jump in and do it all? You know, why isn't this the only kind of trading that goes on? You'd have to earn huge amounts of money. Now, the slide I just skipped over for the sake of time, I did a little EROI calculation on the returns. And the returns in 1930 were really big, and the returns nowadays would be tremendous. And I was wondering, why aren't they so tremendous? Then I found this slide, and I was confused at first. I thought, what is happening here? Well, after I looked at it for a while, I thought, this looks just like an invasive species. It starts, you've got exponential growth, and at that point, during exponential growth, it's doing battle with the organisms in the ecosystem that it's more able to survive when it's doing battle with those. But eventually it hits some kind of carrying capacity and the growth stops. After that, it's not doing battle with the pre-existing organisms in the ecosystem, it's doing battle with itself. So at this point, you've got high-frequency traders fighting with high-frequency traders. The peculiarity of that is, instead of having immense profits, it's a 50-50 flip of the coin who wins, right? If you've got two high-speed traders fighting with, duking it out with each other, so you hit some kind of a carrying capacity. Now, I thought invasive species was kind of a derogatory thing to call it, so I thought I'd come up with another description like sustainable parasite load. So how is the GFE different from a real economy? I want you to look at the third box down in particular. In the 1960s, the average investment in the New York Stock Exchange was held for 8 years. So everybody was a Warren Buffett thing, right? In 2017, on the New York Stock Exchange, the average investment was held for 20 seconds. 20 seconds. The average time that it took to do a transaction on the New York Stock Exchange in 2017 was 1/1,000,000th of a second. The difference between the winner and the loser was 1/1,000,000th of a second. They developed algorithms that would watch the prices go by, create the profile, set the trigger, jump in and buy, then jump out and sell, right? So it was algorithms doing battle with algorithms. I'm going to round it out now. There's a great story for January of this year. One high-frequency trader made a little tweak to his algorithm, thinking that he would just be a little faster than the other guys, and accidentally purchased several billions of dollars worth of stocks on the New York Stock Exchange that he didn't want to purchase. So he had to sell them in a hurry. Lost $400 million. Well, very quickly, the other high-frequency traders learned about this, like sharks circling an injured animal, and within a few days, the injured HFT trader was swallowed up in a merger. think we'll stop there.
For the company.